before we begin, if you've ever beaten yourself up for something long after you should have moved on, if you've ever confused feeling bad with becoming better, if you've ever wondered why guilt seems to follow you even when you're trying your hardest to grow, stay right here. This conversation is going to change the way you see yourself. And if Empire of the Mind is the kind of channel that makes you think differently, that pulls back the curtain on your inner world and hands you something real, subscribe right now. Turn on the notifications, because we don't do surface level here. We go deep. Now let's get into it. Two voices speak when you do something wrong. The first voice says, what you did was harmful. It was beneath who you are. You need to make it right. The second voice says, you are harmful. You are beneath everyone around you. You will never be right. Both voices arrive after a mistake. Both voices feel serious, even righteous. Both voices sound, on the surface, like conscience. But only one of them is. Carl Jung understood something about the human psyche that most of us spend decades discovering the hard way. Not all suffering is productive. Not all self-criticism is wisdom. Not all guilt is guiding you forward. Some of it, perhaps most of it, is keeping you locked in a psychological prison that was built for you long before you were old enough to question its walls. The difference between conviction and shame is not a small distinction. It is not a matter of degree. It is the difference between transformation and paralysis, between becoming and unraveling, between a life that grows and a life that simply repeats. Let's begin with what Jung called the shadow. Every one of us, as we grow up, learns which parts of ourselves are acceptable, which emotions are allowed, which behaviors earn love, and which ones earn punishment. And the parts that are deemed unacceptable, the anger, the neediness, the failure, the sexuality, the ambition, the doubt, those parts don't disappear, they get pushed down into the unconscious, into what Jung called the shadow, the dark basement of the psyche, where everything we've rejected about ourselves lives in the dark, waiting. Now here is the critical point. The shadow is not evil. It is not your enemy. It is simply unlived. It is the parts of you that never got permission to exist in the light. And this is precisely where shame is born. Shame is not a response to what you did. Shame is a verdict on who you are. And most of the time, shame doesn't arise from your adult conscience making a mature moral evaluation. Shame arises from the shadow, from all those early messages that told you certain parts of you were unforgivable, unlovable, too much, not enough, wrong. At the root. When you make a mistake as an adult, something interesting happens. The mistake touches the shadow. It brushes up against those buried beliefs: I am bad, I am a burden, I am fundamentally flawed, and suddenly, what could have been a simple moral correction becomes a full psychological collapse. That is a shame. And Jung would be very clear with you. Shame is not your conscience. Shame is your wound. So then what is conviction? Conviction, true moral conviction, is what happens when the conscious self, the grown adult you have become, evaluates a behavior and says, that was not aligned with my values. That caused harm. I am capable of better. I choose better. Notice the structure of that statement. It is about the behavior. It is forward-facing. It assumes capacity for change. It honors both the wrong that was done and the wholeness of the person who did it. Jung called the process of integrating the shadow individuation the ongoing, lifelong work of bringing what is unconscious into consciousness. Of seeing yourself clearly, not with the cruel, distorted eyes of shame, but with the honest, compassionate eyes of a person committed to becoming whole. Conviction is a tool of individuation. Shame is its counterfeit. Conviction says, I see what I did. I understand its impact. I will grow. Shame says, I am what I did. I cannot escape it. I will hide. Now I want to introduce you to one of Jung's most important concepts, because it lives right at the heart of this conversation, the persona. The persona, as we've explored before on this channel, is the mask we present to the world, the curated, socially acceptable version of ourselves. The persona is not inherently bad. We all need one. But the problem comes when we become so fused with the mask that we forget the face underneath. Shame is deeply connected to the persona. Here's how. When your persona, your public self, your identity, the version of you that you've presented to the world, when that is threatened, the psyche experiences it as an existential crisis. Not just, I did something wrong, but the story I have been telling about who I am is now under threat. This is why shame can feel like death. Psychologically, it is a kind of death, the death of the persona. And the ego, desperate to survive, responds not with honest self-examination, but with defense, collapse, or attack. It hides, it rages, it self-destructs. It confesses compulsively, not to make amends, but to relieve the unbearable internal pressure. None of that is growth. All of that is survival. Conviction, by contrast, doesn't need the persona to survive. It operates from a deeper layer, from what Jung called the self. The self is not the mask you show the world. The self is the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow, strength and wound. And the self is large enough to hold a mistake without being destroyed by it. When you act from conviction, you're not protecting an image, you're refining a soul. Let me make this even more concrete, because I think this is where the philosophy has to become personal. Think of someone you know, or perhaps it is you who grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where mistakes were met not with correction but with withdrawal, where the message was not, you did something wrong, but you are wrong, where failure wasn't a moment, it was a verdict. In that environment, the developing psyche learns a catastrophic equation. My worthiness is contingent on my performance. Make a mistake, lose your value. Show a flaw, lose your belongings. Be human, lose your love. Jung would say that children built their entire persona around the desperate project of staying acceptable, of never letting the shadow out, of being good enough, smart enough, quiet enough, agreeable enough to remain safe. And then that child becomes an adult, and they make a mistake, a real one maybe. And instead of their conscience speaking, instead of a clean, productive reckoning, the entire architecture of early survival collapses on top of them. That is not guilt. That is not conviction. That is the reactivation of an old wound. And you cannot think your way out of it with the same mind that built the prison. This is where Jung's concept of the transcendent function becomes essential. Jung believed that within every human psyche, there exists a capacity not easily accessed, not automatically available, but real, to hold two opposing truths at the same time and allow something new to emerge from the tension between them. In the context of shame versus conviction, the two opposing truths are these: I did something wrong, and I am still worthy of love. Shame cannot hold both. Shame collapses one in favor of the other, usually by saying, you did something wrong, therefore you are unworthy of love, therefore you must suffer indefinitely, and that suffering is what makes you good. But that is not morality. That is self-punishment masquerading as conscience. And Jung would tell you, self-punishment is not atonement. It is an indulgence. It is the ego refusing to release control over the moral narrative, refusing to trust the self to carry the complexity of being an imperfect human being. The transcendent function says something more difficult and more beautiful. Both things are true. Hold them both. Don't collapse. Don't escape. Stay in the tension and let transformation happen. That is conviction. That is the spiritual work. I want to speak now to those of you who have been carrying shame for years, maybe decades, maybe for something you did, maybe for something that was done to you, because shame, grotesquely, does not restrict itself to the guilty. Shame attaches itself to victims as readily as it attaches to perpetrators. It says to the abused child, "This happened because of something broken in you." It says to the person who was betrayed, "You should have seen it coming." It says to the one who failed publicly, "You will never live this down." If that is you, if you are carrying shame that was never yours to carry, I need you to hear this. Shame is not a moral teacher. It is a jailer. And the key to the cell is not more self-punishment. It is not more confession, more self-flagellation, more years of proving to the world or to yourself that you have suffered enough to deserve belonging again. The key is integration. The key is looking at the shadow, at the buried, wounded, rejected part of yourself and saying, "I see you. I am not afraid of you. You are part of me, and I am not going to exile you anymore." That is the beginning of genuine moral transformation. Not shame, not performance, not the exhausting theater of public repentance. Wholeness, slowly, painfully, honestly, earned. Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, not to approve of everything you've done, not to excuse what caused harm, not to abandon your values or relinquish accountability, but to accept that you, the full, complicated, contradictory, sometimes failing, sometimes luminous human being that you are not beyond redemption. You are not beyond growth. You are not the worst thing you've ever done. Conviction agrees with this. Conviction says, "Yes, I did that. Now, who am I going to be?" Shame disagrees. Shame says, "You did that. Now that is who you are, forever." One of those voices is guiding you. One of those voices is consuming you. And the spiritual work, the real work, the Jungian work, is learning to tell the difference. Not just intellectually, but in your body, in the quality of the silence after the mistake. Whether you are moving toward the light or circling endlessly in the dark, conviction moves. Shame circles. Conviction builds. Shame burns. Conviction says, "I can do better." Shame says, "I am beyond better." Know which voice you are listening to, because that more than anything else will determine the shape of your life. If this landed for you, if it named something you've been feeling but couldn't find the words for, then you are exactly who Empire of the Mind was built for. Subscribe to this channel. Join a growing community of people who are done with surface-level self-help and ready to do the real, difficult, rewarding inner work. Every video we release is a tool, a Jungian lens, a philosophical framework, a new way of understanding why you do what you do and who you are underneath it all. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs it, because someone in your life is confusing their shame for their conscience right now. And this might be the thing that sets them free. The empire we are building is not built on perfection. It is built on wholeness. And it starts, as it always does, within.